academic skills math, and I teach a lot of the math for people who hate math. So there's first level, college level classes for the folks who aren't heading toward calculus and pretty particular statistics. And my experience is that a lot of times if you've not ever worked with a graphing calculator, it can be very nerve-wracking to kind of look at that for the first time, intimidating to look at it for the first time. And so I wanted to kind of give you guys an opportunity to kind of get in, maybe get a little ahead of the curve with the calculator and just kind of the big picture of how a graphing calculator works, so that when you get to the point where you're doing that button pushing in your stat class, maybe you're a little less anxious about it. So first piece of advice I want to give you is that there are fantastic videos on YouTube for anything you would ever have to do with your calculator. So when in doubt, just type in which calculator you're using, whether it's the TI-83 or the TI-84, and then what you're trying to do with it. So I'm going to use as examples from stat. If I wanted to find the mean, I would just type in, let's say, TI-83 mean. And you're going to get fantastic videos that are up there that are very specific button pushes where they're really showing you step by step how to do it. I find those to be much more useful than my math lab / my stat lab videos that are available, although there are some that are there. The other thing that it's important for you to be able to do with the calculator is to just recognize for what tasks is your instructor letting you use the calculator, and for what tasks are they really looking for you to do by hand, written out computation, because that'll vary by instructor. And if your instructor is kind of all-in calculator, which a lot of them are, which means if it can be done on the calculator, then you're allowed to do it that way, and the intent is for you to do it that way. When you go for tutoring or things like that, you make sure you let them know, I want to do this on the calculator. You be the boss and you control that situation, because it's a very different situation to use a calculator than to write out by hand. But I don't want you to think you're losing knowledge about the topic by using the calculator. You're not cheating yourself out of anything, because what the calculator is replacing, to be perfectly honest, is one of those good old, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, order of operations problems. When it comes to stat and when it comes to a lot of what you're doing in even an algebra class, you're working with a formula. And in a formula, you have variables and you're going to be replacing them with numbers. And the hard part of the math problem, to be honest, is the reading the problem and knowing what formula am I supposed to be using at all, and that turns into what function on the calculator am I using. And then, given what the different variables are, how do I know which number goes in which spot? And when you're using the calculator, you have to know those same exact pieces of information. So really, all the calculator is doing for you is the busy work of the arithmetic, for the most part. And so, I want you to kind of step back and appreciate the fact that you still have to understand the problems in order to use the calculator properly. And so when you're preparing yourself for a quiz or a test, you want to think about what are the commands that are in play, what are the ones that I need to be aware of, and then muscle memory. You have to do enough repetition of the processes to know that you can do them and repeat that when you get to the test. One of the things when you start to get to college level math, it's different than basic skills math, is you don't normally get 50 of the same thing to have to work on. You don't normally get that level of repetition. And so it's going to be up to you to maybe do the same problem 2 or 3 times, maybe on Monday and then on Wednesday and then on Saturday, you run through that same problem and that same calculation just to get the sequence of buttons down, right? So let me just get a sense of how many of you are in a stat class and that's kind of the course that you're trying to prep for, stat. Okay, and you guys are in what?
Algebra concepts.
Algebra concepts?
No, I mean, it's
just interested, okay. So with algebra concepts, they're not going to even let you use a graphing calculator. So you can use a...
My teacher said I can.
Well, your teacher's going to be in deep duty, because that's actually a departmental policy that you can't use a graphing calculator. You can only use a scientific calculator.
Oh, well, I don't have a graphing. I have a...
Right, that's what I'm saying. So graphing...
This one I can use.
Right.
I didn't know the difference.
Yeah, so graphing calculators are not permitted in algebra concepts, but a scientific calculator is. So, the difference between the two, a scientific calculator, although it's going to do several statistical calculations, trig calculations, logarithmic calculations, it's not menu-driven like a graphing calculator would be. So With the graphing calculator, in general, you're going to be using almost like a little mini Excel sheet, a very, very basic version of that. And so when you have information that you're trying to analyze, you're going to be typing it into what we call a list. And so, the first sequence of button pushes that, and we'll do a little hands-on if you like. The first sequence of button pushes you're going to do is how we get information into that little Excel sheet. And then separate from that, you're going to be analyzing the information using some type of a function. So if you have your graphing calculator with you, I want you to go ahead and get that out. And so one of the features of the graphing calculator is that every button on the face actually can do 3 different things. And so what you're going to notice is that on the face of the key is printed some type of a number or a function, but then you're going to also see 2 additional functions that are in an alternate color. It might be yellow, green, blue, right, on the body of the calculator. And you'll also notice toward the upper left-hand corner keys with those exact colors on them. So one of them is going to say second on it, or shift, right? So when you want to access something in that yellow color, let's say, you would hit the yellow button before you access that. So the most common place where that has to happen is when you want to take a square root. So let's say we wanted to take the square root of 25, right? We would first hit that second button, right, the color, and then we would hit right below it the button that accesses the square root sign, which is on the X squared key. And so you'll actually see the square root symbol come up on the face of your calculator. And then we're going to put in the number we want to take the square root of, which would be 25 as an example. And then what you might not be used to yet is that enter is like your equal sign. So you're going to hit the enter key, and it's going to actually do that computation, that calculation for you. Now when you're done, what I usually like to do is clear my screen, because what the graphing calculator does is it leaves your old business on there before you get to new business. So I'll normally clear my screen. So if you go ahead right under the arrow keys and you hit that clear button, and you'll see you get like this totally clean screen. And then you, oh gosh, I needed that, oops. If you hit that second key with enter, it'll bring back the last calculation that you did. And if you hit second enter again, it'll bring back the second to last calculation you did. And you can scroll back through about 10 calculations that way. Second enter, second enter, second enter. Where that can also be useful is if you're using a function in your stat class and you're doing, let's say, 10 problems of the same kind, you can use second enter to bring back that function and not have to then go through 4 or 5 different clicks to get to where you want to go. So second with enter will always bring back your previous calculation. Clear screen is going to be, again, how you get to just a kind of clean home screen. I'm a big fan of that because one of the more common things that I'll see students do as a mistake is to miscopy from previous problem and they write down something that was really old business. So I recommend clearing your screen between every problem because you can always get back to what you want using that second and enter, right? So it seemed like a lot of you were in stat. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you the stat button. So to the left of your arrow keys, there's an actual button that says stat right on the face of it. And that's going to bring you into a menu screen. And so that's what I was saying before, that with a graphing calculator, it works through menus. And so the very first menu screen that you see, the very first item on it with a number 1 to the left says edit. And then you'll notice that there are other things below it, 2, 3, 4 listed out. When you get to a menu screen, you have 2 ways that you can get to something on that screen. You can either type the number next to it, or you can use those up and down arrows till you arrow to the thing that you want to select, and then pick enter when you hit the one that you want. So either of those is a way to select a particular item on the menu that you want to do. So I actually do want to select the very first one, the edit. So you can either hit the enter key or the number 1 key to enter. And that's going to bring you into that little spreadsheet that I was talking about. And so you're actually going to see at the top of your screen L1, L2, L3. And if you were to arrow over to the right, you would see actually up to 6 lists are already entered there for you that could be used. In Stat 1, you're going to use at least the first 2 lists, and depending on how your instructor teaches certain things, you could use up to the first 5, depending on certain ways that they would lecture. But certainly you would be using the first couple lists. So I want you to go ahead and put into that first position the number 1. And then what we can do is either down arrow or hit enter, and it's going to move you into the next cell down, right? So all I'd like you to do is just put in the numbers 1 through 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now what you should see kind of on the bottom of your screen is it's going to mention that you're in L1 with a little parenthesis 6 or a little parenthesis 5, depending on whether you hit enter or didn't hit enter on that 5th input. And that's letting you know that you're in list 1 in position number, let's say you're at 6. That's a little check you want to do on yourself. If you know that your list has 5 numbers in it, then you know that you should be on either L5 if you're in position 5 if you're at the bottom of the list, or position 6 if you've gone into the next cell. At least you know you have the right number of numbers. It doesn't guarantee you that you type the right numbers into the list, but at least you know that you have the right number of numbers. Because if you were at position 7 or position 4, you know you've made a mistake in your entry. If you've made a mistake in your entry, you can type over. So if, for example, in the position that was a 1, you would want it a 10, you can just go ahead and arrow up and type in a 10, and it'll put a 10 in that spot instead. You can also insert or delete items from a list. So if you go up kind of toward, and you don't have to push the buttons, but up toward there's a row of keys. One of them has a DEL on it. DEL stands for delete. And in your alternate color, your second color, you'll see INS for insert. So what I'd like to do is, I'd like you to go to the number 3, and with that number 3 highlighted, I'd like you to hit that DEL key. And so now what should happen is you should have 4 numbers on your list, 1, 2, 4, and 5. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to have that highlighter right on the number 4. Okay, right on the number 4. And we're going to do our second key, and now that delete/insert key, and that's you're going to see it has pushed now the information down and giving you an empty spot there where you can put the information, so you can put your 3 back in there. So inserting and deleting, right, are ways that we can take a single number in and out of our list if we need to do that. But you could also, again, just type over. So if I've made a mistake in the entry, I would just type over. If I have forgotten an entry, I would use insert, or if I've double counted an entry, I would use delete for that. Right? Now this screen is not where the analysis happens. So this screen is where just the data entry happens. So if you go up to your second key, the key immediately to the right of it says quit in your alternate color, and that's going to bring you back to your home screen.
You want us to do that?
So you can go ahead and do that. So I want to show you two things. So if I've hit my stat key, right? If I hit my stat key and I hit the enter to go into edit, when I come back in, you see how that has all those same 5 numbers in there? Even if you turned your calculator off and came back in, those numbers are going to be there until you take them out, right? If right now you were to hit your clear key, nothing really happens, right? So you're there and you hit clear and you're still there. That's when you use quit. So there are 2 ways where the screen is doing something I don't like that I get out of it. My first line of attack is clear, right? Clear gets me to a home screen. If I hit clear and I'm still where I don't want to be, then I use quit. So one of those 2 things will always back you out. And it is always the case that your cat walks across the screen, or oops, your thumbs got big and you get somewhere you don't want to be, or you typed in something that you didn't want to. And I know that initially that's an anxious thing. Just back yourself out to home screen and come back in and start again. It's never any harm done. It might take you a minute to get something typed back in. But as I mentioned, if you've typed things into a list, it's all still there. So you're not losing any information. Just go ahead, come back out to your home screen, and then refresh and go back into your calculation. Right? So we had the numbers there, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I want you to go ahead and hit your stat button again. And this time, instead of selecting the edit command, down the list there, you see two different sort commands. Sort with an A says ascending, that means it's going to order whatever numbers you've put in from low to high. And the sort D is descending, right? That's the one I want us to pick. So we're going to pick sort D. You can either do that how? What are the two ways you can do it?
Use your arrows.
Arrow down, or what's the other way we can do it?
Pick the number.
Just hit the number next to the function you want. So what you should see now is on your home screen the word sort D with a parenthesis.
Yep.
That's just kind of cursor flashing at you. That's saying it's waiting for you to tell it something. And what is waiting for you to tell it is what list should it look at. So this is something that's pretty common in the graphing calculator, is you've picked a function that you want to do, and it's always going to check with you, what list do you want me to do this to? Don't do this. But if you were to hit enter without telling it a list to look at, it's going to look at list 1. It's a bad habit. So I strongly recommend that every time you use a function, you very consciously make a choice what list you want it to look at. Because there are times in stat where you're going to want it to look at two different lists. Or maybe you only want it looking at list 2 and not list 1. And so to have the habit of always telling it what list to look at is a good habit. So we're going to tell it to look at list 1. And the way we're going to do that, and again, don't button push yet. If you look above your keys that are numbered 1 through 6, each of those 6 keys in your yellow color or your alternate color has the names of your 6 lists, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, L6. And so what we're going to do to tell it to sort list 1 is we're going to hit our second key and then the number 1. And what you're going to see is now sort D with the little L1 next to it. And now you hit enter.
You want us to do that?
Yep. And now when you hit enter, what happens?
Done.
It just says done. All right, we did it. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's hit our stat button and now go into edit. So number 1 there. And now you should see your list says 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it has sorted into descending order.
So you don't need to put that other parenthesis, you don't need to
You
close that
actually don't
parenthesis.
need to close the parenthesis.
Okay, good.
So you can, but you don't have to.
Okay.
So
Which is a better habit.
I would tend to close it.
Close it
I would
just
tend
in
to
case.
close it. Unless you start to find that you're getting error messages because you have more complicated expressions
Right.
where you have multiple sets of parentheses, I would get in the habit of closing it.
Okay.
There are some functions on the new, you happen to have the older
I do
TI-83,
83, yeah.
but on the 84 there are some things that you're going to do where if you don't close it, you actually get problems.
Okay.
And so it's a good habit to close it.
Okay.
So the sort command allows you to put things into order, ascending, descending, and just as a preview, and if you're in Stat 1, you probably have heard of this before, finding, let's say, a median, right? We'd want things to be in order to do something like that. So there are situations where we might want to put a list of numbers in order. Right? So another thing that you're going to be able to do is to, at one time, do several calculations to your data. So we're going to hit our stat button again, and this time we're going to go over one column to the right. So it's going to bring us across our menu to a menu called Calc for Calculate. And again, you then have a list of things that you could calculate. And we happen to want the very first one on the list. And it's called one var stat, meaning one variable, statistics. So I want you to go ahead and select that. And like when you did the sort command, what happens? You have the command on your home screen and it's splashing at you. So what does it want us to tell it?
What list?
A list to look at. So we're going to go ahead and tell it a list. How do we do that? Second button.
One.
And then your number 1 to pick L1. Perfect.
Oops, I got a syntax error.
Okay, so let's see if we can peek. So hit go to for me.
What did I, oh, wait.
Yeah, you got that little,
See, I'm putting too many in.
right? So now because you don't want that, you can use that DEL key to delete out that
Just that
piece
one
that you
thing,
don't want,
and then
and then you
just
should
hit
be good.
There we go.
All right.
Gotcha.
So depending on how far you've gotten into your lectures in statistics, you may or may not recognize some of the symbols that you see on the screen. So it starts off with an X bar. Does anyone remember what that would be a symbol for?
What is that? It's sample mean.
Sample mean. Okay, so that's our colloquially we would say our average, but our sample mean.
Right.
And then as you go through the list, you'll see several things listed. Down a couple from there, you see a little lowercase n. And that should have a 5 next to it because we put 5 numbers in our list. That's our sample size, our number of numbers, right? What I'd like you to do is near that letter N, you should see a little downward arrow, right? If you now hit your downward pointing arrow, it's going to scroll through some other information. So you're going to see, for example, min and Q1 and MED and Q3 and max. So I want to talk about those 5 numbers.
Okay.
So this takes, we have a list of data. Min, probably obvious to you, what do you think that's going to stand for?
The minimum number.
Right, minimum number on the list. And max is going to be the
Max.
maximum number on the list. MED, median.
Mm-hmm.
You recall what median stands for?
Median is the middle number.
All right, median stripped down the highway, right? It's the middle number on the list. So what's happening here is they're actually giving us the lowest on the list, the highest on the list. MED for median is the middle number. That's also the 50% point. And then Q1 and Q3, think quarters. Q1, a quarter of the way through. 1/4 is 25% of the way through. Q3, 3/4 is 75% of the way through. So what those 5 numbers have given you were at the first number on the list, 25% of the way through, 50% of the way through, 75% of the way through, all the way through. So it's giving us this really nice picture of where positionally numbers are located on the list. You can use your up arrow and go back to see other information up on the screen. If you're in stat class, you are going to be pounding that function every day, right? That is the way that we generate information. So I have data I want to analyze. I put it in a list. I do 1 var stat to get this summary of information that describes, right, the different characteristics of the data. And you're going to pound on that and pound on that, particularly in the beginning of the course. That's a chapter 2. All of chapter 2 is pounding on that. All right, so clear your screen. So we're not going to actually analyze, but I want to demonstrate to you. Use your stat button one more time, and we're going to go over to the right 2 times. And now we get to what's called the test menu. And so you're going to see z-test, t-test, 1 prop, right? You 2 sample z, 2 sample t. So as you move toward your 6th and 7th chapters, right, you get toward the end of your stat course, you're going to be living on that menu. And you're going to be conducting statistical tests. I have this sample evidence, and I want to decide, does this sample evidence support some hypothesis that I have? And we're going to be using those tests in order to do those investigations. So that stat button, for the most part, is going to be where you're going to be living when you're in that course, right? But there are other things that you may need to do by hand, by calculation, and I just want to make sure you're comfortable with 2 of them in particular. So we did the square root function. I'm going to do that one more time just to be sure we're clear on that. So if I want to exponent 2 square a number, right, I'm using the key itself that says x squared. If I want to opposite direction, take the square root of a number, I have to use my second key to do that. So we're going to start with this. We're going to start with the number 10. And then I want you to hit that x squared button. So you're just going to type in the number 10.
Are we still in test?
No, this was back to your home screen. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Okay.
So
Clear and go to home.
So if you should be on your clear home screen. So you either want to quit or clear screen, depending on where you were when we started.
Gotcha.
So we're going to put in the number 10,
Right.
and then I want you to hit that x squared button. And then you hit enter.
Right.
So you should have the number 100, right? That's 10 times 10 is So now we're going to look at a second way that we can put in an exponent. That method only works if we're squaring a number. But let's say we wanted to do 10 to the 3rd power, right? So get to a clear screen, put in your number 10. And then right above your division key on the right-hand side, there's a little upward pointing arrow. That's your to the. So if I want to do 10 to the 3rd, I put my 10 in, I hit my little to the button, and then I'm going to hit my 3.
And then enter?
And then enter.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So on your screen, you have your 10 in there so far? Now we're going to, above your division key, there's a little up arrow.
We're gonna hit that.
Above you, like if you look add, subtract, multiply, divide on the right-hand side,
Okay.
and then we've got a little one that points up.
Yes.
That's where we're going to point. That's going to say to the calculator, I'm ready to put in an exponent. Then we put the actual exponent in, 3. and then when you hit enter, you should get your 1,000 now. So if you want to square a number, you have two ways you can do it. You can either x squared, or you can to the with a second power. Either of those gets you to the same spot. Eye of the beholder, what you think is easier to do. But if you're using an exponent that's not 2, the way you're going to put it in is always using that exponent key. Now, if we want to go in the opposite direction, we want to take a square root. So we'll go ahead, clear screen, and let's start with our second button. And then we're going to use that x squared button that has the little square root symbol as the alternate. You should see now the square root symbol on your calculator. So when you're using an exponent, the exponent comes after the number. But when we're doing a square root, it has to come before. So that's unusual when you're doing, a lot of times using like a basic handheld calculator, you would put your number in and then hit the square root key. In the calculator, right, the graphing calculator, syntax goes the other way. You put the square root symbol in first, then the number. We'll use 100 or 25, whatever you'd like to use, and then you hit your enter key, and that's going to take the square root. So it's very common in the by hand formulas that you will end up having to do, because not every formula is going to be something that the calculator has programmed in. Squaring something or taking a square root, you're still going to need to do that by hand sometimes. All right? So your calculator does know order of operations. So when you type something in, it does work it in terms of an order of operations problem. So give me a clear screen again. And I want you to type in 10 plus 2 times 3. So on your screen, it should read 10 times sign, and if you were doing 10 plus, sorry,
2 times
2 times 3. So before you hit your enter key, when you're doing your basic, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, you know that what you want it to do is what?
Multiply.
Multiply first, okay? And if I multiplied, I'd be multiplying the 2 times 3 and getting 6, and then adding that to the 10, right? So go ahead and hit your enter key, and you'll see that it actually recognizes that, all right? So, give me a clear screen. Now, this is going to test your algebra skills a little bit. So, before you button push, if I were to give you a -2, no parentheses on it, right? And it had a square on it. So it says -2 exponent 2. What should the answer tell me it is?
-4.
All right, -4. Anyone have a different answer?
+4.
+4. +4.
-2.
It's a -2 with an exponent 2.
Okay, -4.
-4. All right. So we have a split decision here. All right. So let's type it in. So your negative key is just to the left of your enter key. It's not your subtraction sign. So there's actually a specific negative number. So we're going to put in our negative, and then our 2, and then our x squared button.
Where's the negative?
Just to the left of your enter key.
At the bottom.
It's a,
Oh, okay.
Negative 4.
all right. And so we see that it is -4. Now, I cannot let you wonder why. An exponent only repeats when it immediately touches. So the base of that exponent was only the 2, not the minus sign.
Right.
Now, if I had wanted -2 times -2, that quantity, I would have wanted to enclose it in parentheses. So you actually have parentheses keys on your calculator. So let's go from a clear screen. And right above your number 7 key, you see an open parenthesis, so we'll choose that. Then we'll put in our -2. And then right above your number 8 key, we'll close the parenthesis. And then we'll put on our square. And we'll hit enter. And there you should see your +4. So the good news is, if you look down at your math problem and it has parentheses in it, just put the parentheses in, right? And if you look down at your math problem and it doesn't have parentheses in it, then don't put your parentheses in. You can basically type into this calculator what you see, and it's a what you see is what you get. So it will do the order of operations calculation correctly. That should make you feel good. If you had one of the basic little calculators, wouldn't necessarily do that. All right? So this is good news for you that this calculator is going to take seriously what you type in. So earlier you were asking me about the closed parenthesis. This is why it's important sometimes to mathematically type in a parenthesis, because to be mathematically correct, the parenthesis sometimes has mathematical meaning. So as a habit, The reason that I suggest that you get used to using the parentheses is because sometimes it can make the difference between a negative answer and a positive answer, and thus a right answer or a wrong answer. Right? So, when you're using the calculator, what I want, coming out of this for you to feel is a little bit less anxious that if you type, a lot of times I see students who haven't used that calculator, they get so anxious and so, literally hands shaking if I type the wrong thing, if I push the wrong button. Don't worry about it. Clear or second quit, get back to a clear screen, and then go back in, dive in again from there. And almost everything that you do in your math class is going to roll to this, one of the sequences that we just did. It's either going to be using some type of a specific menu, or it's going to be using a calculation where you're using maybe an exponent or a square root of some kind, and you'll be able to kind of see the way the syntax works now. So all of you kind of came in here for a different reason. I want to make sure that if there was something in particular that you came in about that I hit on it or help you with it. So was there's something very specific that you came for that you wanted to hear about?
Well, I just wanted to learn how to use graph calculator, basically.
Okay. So you feel like you have a little bit of a walking
Oh, yeah.
start with it? Okay. And again, YouTube videos, right? If you feel like your instructor went too fast for you, your MyStatLab does have a calculator manual, which has direct button pushes, so that's something you can refer to if you want to refer to that. So on the MyStatLab left-hand menu there, you actually will see the supplement there that's the calculator supplement. You kind of maybe feel a little bit left out coming from algebra concepts, so I want to make sure that you understand.
Well, the last thing you started doing was like what I needed.
But the
I really didn't
but the
need.
graphing calculator is not allowed in that course. So
Yeah.
that kind of scientific calculator is a different type of calculator, and the syntax involved is a little different. So unfortunately, this particular session was for a calculator you're not allowed to use.
I guess I just did not read it exactly. I just saw calculator and I just didn't read the whole thing.
Yeah. So a scientific calculator is not going to be able to produce a graph on the screen.
Right.
This calculator could, although it will do a lot of neat stuff. Basically, for that calculator, once you get to the end of your course and you're doing the logarithms,
Right.
that's when you're going to start using that in class.
Excellent.
Right. Was there anything specific that you came in that
No,
you
I
needed?
just, I never used a scientific calculator.
Okay.
But then I went on YouTube and tried to, figure out what I needed to do just to get started.
Right.
And then I read your email, I was like, yes.
Yeah. So
now
so anyway, I'm Kelly Jackson. I'm over in Halpern Hall. 234 is my office number. If you want to stop in, or if you have something that you need, you can email me at kjackson at the college address. But the one piece of advice that I want to give you about the calculator is don't be afraid when you get to tutoring to tell them I want the calculator. And if that tutor's not able to do that, you want to walk out and say, go tell your teacher, tell the chair, let them know, over tutoring, I need them to be able to use the calculator, because you want to make sure you're getting the right help. And so your instructor will, I think, be clear to you when you're allowed to use it and when you're not. If you're not going to be allowed to use it, where they're going to want you to do things by hand. And so you want to make sure you're capable of articulating to tutors what you need to know by hand, what you need to know by calculator, because that's your best line of attack for that outside of class help. Okay? So thanks so much for stopping in, and good luck to you with your semester.
Excellent, thanks
All
so
right?
much.